Discarding and ratios are two of the most common questions that I get asked about sourdough. Why do we do it? How do we do it? And what does it matter? So I'm going to use some Lego blocks to see if I can help you make sense why we discard, what it means, what a ratio is, and why it makes sense and why it makes a difference to our sourdough starters. Okay, so bear with me as I go through this with you. So I've got 3 different colours here, and we're going to call this one here our starter. Okay, so this is past day 1, because of course day 1 is flour and water. Once we've done flour and water, we then have a starter. It might not be active, but we do have a starter. Okay, so this is our starter. Then we have flour, and then we have water. And whenever we feed a sourdough starter, we always need these 3 ingredients, and they are the starter itself, some flour and some water. And we need to be feeding them in what we call a ratio. And a ratio can be whatever you want it to be. So I've got 4 blocks here. So the number 1 can be whatever you want it to be. So if we did a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio, I'd have 4 red blocks, which is my starter, 4 yellow blocks, which is my flour, and then 4 brown blocks, which are my water. But if this was 20 blocks, that was 20, and that was 20, that would still be a 1-to-1, because each one of the ones are the same, okay? And it's only when we change the numbers that the ratio changes. But first of all, I'm going to show you what that means with regards to discarding, because one of the most common questions and then conversations that I have with people is, how are you discarding? So if we've got 3 items, we need to think of everything in thirds. So if I'm going to be feeding my starter, and let's say we're going to feed the starter, so I start with my starter and I've got 4 blocks. So if I'm going to be feeding at a 1-to-1, I've got 4 blocks, 1, 2, 3 and 4, and that is my number 1. So if I'm then going to be feeding at a 1-to-1, I then need the next one to be the same, because 1 and 1 are the same, but I can choose whatever I want my 1 to be. So then I move on to my flour, which is 1, 2, 3 and 4. And then I move on to the water, which are these ones, which is 1, 2, 3 and 4. So of course tomorrow, when I want to feed it, if I want to do a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio, I need to keep this as one thing and then repeat that again. So if I take all of these away, it doesn't matter what I'm taking away, it's what I'm left with. So I want to be left with 4. So I take all of those away, okay? So now I've got this. So to do a 1-to-1-to-1, I now need to do 4 of the flour and 4 of the water. So I would then come in with 4 of the flours and 4 of the ratios. But what I hear a lot of people say is that they aren't taking away a certain amount to leave a specific amount behind. They're taking away half. So if I took away half of this, I'm now left with 6. Okay, so let's turn this into 6. So I now have 6 of these. Okay, so if I now fed it as I did before with the 4 and the 4, I now have more starter than I have what I fed it with. So if I translate that into a 50-50-50, if I have 50 grams of starter, 50 grams of flour and 50 grams of water, and I take half away, I'm left with 75. So if I then feed it with 50 and 50, there's 25 grams of starter that's kind of not accounted for, because that's not a true 1-to-1. That would be like a 1.5 to 1-to-1. So here we now have this. And if we think about each red block as being hungry, okay, because the starter gets hungry. So if we think of each block, the starter piece can now eat a piece of flour and a piece of water. And that one can eat that. And those ones can do that. And those ones can do that. But then these 2 here, they stay hungry, okay? And that is what is going to be slowing down your starter, because you've got 2, before you've even got going with your starter, you've got 2 pieces of starter that are starting off hungry. Okay, so if you're waiting for your starter to rise and become active and bubbly, you've actually in essence got 2 pieces of starter that are still hungry from last time. Okay, so we now have 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. So if I took 7 away, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, we're now left with this one. So now I'm going to feed this with 4 and 4 again. So I'll feed it with 1, 2, 3 and 4. And then 1, 2, 3 and 4. Which means I've now got 3 that are hungry. So if we carry on doing that type of feeding, what we're going to end up with is a starter that's incredibly hungry, isn't going to be active, and isn't going to be at a true 1-to-1 ratio. Now, I know that a lot of people say that a starter shouldn't be fed at a 1-to-1-to-1 ratio. It should always be fed at a 1-to-2 or a 1-to-3 or anything else, and a 1-to-1 should basically never be used. Well, I do use it a lot. I do find it quite effective. But if you don't understand the 1-to-1, then the 1-to-3, the 1-to-4, the 1-to-10 is never going to help you. Understanding this at this point is going to be one of the most key things to getting your starter active. And when people do message me telling me that their starter isn't active, generally this is the key thing. So then if we look at the starter itself and think about doing the 1-to-2-to-2 ratio, that's where it becomes quite interesting, because of course if we switch it over and call, because I'm running out of colours, if we say that the brown is the starter, okay, so we've got 4 starters, and then we feed it at a 1-to-2-to-2 ratio, what we have here is we have 4 starters, and then each one gets fed with 2. So, got to find the other one. And then of course, we've got the water as well, because they do get a bit thirsty, making sure they've got that. So what we've got now is each piece of starter now has 2 bits of flour and 2 bits of water to feed on. So now they're going to be like, we're so hungry, we're so happy, we're going to like double in size, we're going to be super, super active. But because they're eating more, it's going to take a little bit longer for that rise. And so you might find that actually having a starter that's fed at a higher ratio means that you might want to feed it before you go to bed at night, and it takes longer so that the next morning it's ready to start your baking with, rather than doing it at a lower ratio, which is quicker, and then it peaks whilst you're sleeping, and then when you get up in the morning, you've missed that beautiful point of being able to make your dough. So of course, it is a case of understanding what a ratio is. So this here is a 1-to-2-to-2 ratio, because for every one of these, we have 2 of these. And of course, you can then take that and turn it into a 1-to-10, a 1-to-20, a 1-to-50, a 1-to-100. And of course, in a large bakery, they're going to be doing that. But if you are struggling with your starter, every now and again, this isn't a thing that you should be doing every time, but literally it's like a once in a blue moon thing, you can actually give it a flour burst, which is basically where you reduce the hydration, where you don't add the water, and you do a 1-to-3-to-2 ratio, and that's going to give you really good results. But if you do that more than once, you're very quickly going to end up with what they call a stiff starter, and they're incredibly difficult to work with. So if you're new to sourdough, I certainly wouldn't be recommending that. But I hope that my use of Lego blocks here helps you understand what a ratio is, why it's important, and why discarding is so important during sourdough. Because of course, if we're not discarding correctly and understanding what's left in our jar, then we're not going to be able to feed it properly to get that beautiful rise and bubbles and everything that's needed to make your lovely sourdough. So if you do have any questions, do pop them in the comments. Do share with me your tips as well, because I don't know everything, but I do just love to share my sourdough tips. And do make sure that you give me a follow as well.